Hello and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever bought new aquarium plants only to watch them slowly melt away, turn yellow and just never take off? It can be really frustrating, but the truth is there are a few really common reasons why aquarium plants just die and just don't take off. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 biggest reasons and how you can avoid them so that your tank finally thrives. So the first mistake is just simply the wrong plant choice. Now, when you're setting up an aquarium, you need to have a clear goal and expectation. So if you're setting up a low-tech tank with no CO2 and no lighting, then it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to grow a plant like Rotala willichii or Tanina fluivitalis, but you are very likely to be able to grow something like a Cryptocorini species. So it's just setting that expectation and understanding your tank's limitations and what it is that you are actually going to be able to grow with the equipment that you have and the time that you're even able to give it. And on the topic of plant choice, one thing that is probably worth sort of like remembering and a good tip to take on board when it does come to planting your aquarium is just picking plants that are all of a similar difficulty. If you've got an easy plant and an advanced plant in the aquarium, which absolutely can be done, but perhaps especially if you're a beginner, those plants are going to have two very different needs. And if you're just focused on how an Anubias grows and not what a Rotala might need, then you're maybe going to miss out on giving the plant some of the key nutrients or lighting or CO2 needs and things like that. If you think about it in nature and across the world, you have various different plants living together. All of these plants require different things, and when they're in a closed container in our aquarium and we're kind of just doing a one-size-fits-all approach to it, it might not always be beneficial to every single plant in there. So I would say, especially if you're a beginner and you're kind of setting up your first tank, just pick all easy category plants or easy to medium category plants. And once you kind of learn how they grow and learn what they need, then perhaps you can move on to the sort of more advanced plants and obviously look then into fertilising, CO2 and lighting and things like that. So yeah, the first one is just simply choosing the wrong plants or trying to force plants together that don't strictly go together based on what you are able to give it. So if you are new to the hobby and you are wondering what kind of plants that you could use, I would recommend things like Anubias, Bucephalandra, Crypt species, Java ferns. A lot of Ludwigias are quite easy. Limnophila sessiliflora is almost like a bulletproof plant. Amazon swords are fairly easy, but they are very hungry, so you do have to root tab them and make sure that you give them lots of nutrients. So there are a lot of beautiful plants out there that you can use to create a really beautiful aquarium that are all actually just classed as easy plants and don't actually require too much in the way of light, nutrients or CO2. So moving on from that, but based on some of those plants that we've just recommended there, the other mistake that people often make is planting incorrectly. Now that can mean literally planting it incorrectly. So for example, if you try to plant Anubias in the substrate, the plant's just going to rot and melt back. And that is because the rhizome of Anubias likes to have a lot of oxygenation and a lot of water flow going over it. The same is also kind of true for Bucephalandra, although there are some species of Bus that can be planted. But generally what you would do is either attach them to your hardscape, so wood or rock, and the roots themselves will actually go down into the substrate and take up the nutrients that they need, but they don't actually physically need planted into the substrate. Other things like lilies, you don't want to fully bury the bulb because again, they kind of like oxygenation, and certain plants that are sort of like rosette plants, you don't want to bury them too deeply. They kind of do best when the crown sits just above the substrate level, again for sort of oxygenation. So there is literally planting the plant wrong. And then the other side of that is planting it in the wrong substrate. So we've covered some plants like Amazon swords and things that really like nutrient rich substrates, and they take up a lot of nutrients from the roots. So if you're planting them in sand and expecting miracles, it's probably not going to happen, and slowly over time the plant's probably just going to turn yellow and eventually die back. So it's making sure that you give the plant the actual substrate and the nutrients that it needs in order to thrive. A lot of people, when they start out, they generally just want to use gravel or sand. And whilst that is an okay growing medium for some plants, I would say there's very few aquarium plants that really thrive in that. That's not to say that you can't use that as a substrate, but you might just need to add root tabs or add extra water column fertilisation for the plants to get any sort of like nutrients that they might be missing, because ultimately that is an inert substrate and it's not going to provide your plants with anything. So the best thing that you can do is get an aqua soil. Now, if you're a beginner, I would maybe avoid using something like Amazonia version 2 because it is extremely high in nutrients and you get a massive ammonia spike with it. But there are soils like aquascaper soil, for example, which is pretty low in nutrients and you don't get that massive initial ammonia spike that might be quite scary and you have to deal with. Obviously, you are still going to have to do the water changes for the first couple of weeks to bring that down and help cycle the tank. But it is a much easier soil for beginners to work with while still providing plants with a lot of nutrients. And one plant that's often overlooked is floating plants. Now, because they have access to CO2 in the atmosphere, they grow quite rapidly and therefore they take up excess nutrients. That's what they're good for in the aquarium, is to take up any excess nutrients, which again can be really good for beginners who are a little bit worried about water parameter swings. And also just when setting up a new tank, it helps sort of get it through that initial spike. But they do need obviously water column fertilisation because that's where the roots are. So yeah, learning how to plant plants properly and in what substrate is going to make a massive difference in the success of your plants. And that kind of leads us into the third point, which is lack of nutrients. Now, it's very easy to just set your aquarium up, put your plants in and kind of just leave it. But in nature, nutrients are always going to be coming in to water systems, whether it's from organics decomposing and like surface runoff from the land, animal waste and things like that. There's always going to be an influx of nutrients coming naturally into waterways. Now, in an aquarium, yes, we have fish and yes, we put fish food in, but very rarely is that enough to feed a full planted tank. If you've only got a few plants in there, you might get away with it, but an aquarium like this couldn't rely on just fish food and waste alone. So you have to add fertilizer into there. Now, I have a video on fertilizer, and the best thing that I could recommend for a beginner is just get a good all-in-one fertilizer, and for the most part of that you'll be absolutely fine. And I guess later on, if you notice any specific deficiencies, you could then look at adding an individual nutrient. But as I say, for the most part, an all-in-one is perfect for beginners. I dose that on this along with nitrogen and potassium separately, just because there's quite a lot of heavy root feeding plants in there, and it's just extremely densely planted. So yeah, just making sure that you provide your plants with food. And the other thing that I highly recommend is root tabs for the root feeders. So you've got liquid fertilizer for the water column and root tabs for the root feeders. And as I say, I've done a bit of a more in-depth video on this, so I'll leave a link to that, so you could perhaps watch that after this just to get a better idea. But generally, just a lack of food source for plants is long-term detrimental to plant health. So yeah, just grab a good all-in-one fertilizer. So the next one is too much or too little, or just in general poorly managed lighting. So lighting is a big one that catches people out, and I guess it's really easy to assume that the more light in your tank equals better growth, but in reality, if you blast your tank with light and the other things aren't balanced out, all you're going to get is algae. So most easy plants that we've talked about, like Crypts, Swords, Anubias, Java Fern, they do well in really low lighting levels, or low to moderate. Whereas things like Crotalas especially do a lot better in highlighting. So this kind of links back to the first point that we made, is just knowing what your plants need and what you need to provide them with. So what I would recommend is try and get, if you can, full RGB lighting. Obviously, plants need a certain spectrum to grow, and in nature that comes from the sun. Obviously in our aquariums, it comes from whatever light we put on the tank. So if you can get an RGB light, that's going to make a big difference to the growth. the coloration and sort of like how it grows, how compact it is, or how bushy it ends up looking. So light is going to play a big factor in the appearance of the plants and how well they grow. Another important thing to mention with lighting is the photo period. So quite often beginners might just turn the tank on and turn it off, the tank light on in the morning and turn it off when they go to bed. At the weekend that might be different, they might forget, and you're creating this really unstable sort of like photo period for plants. And like in nature, again, plants have almost like a circadian rhythm and they have a set photo period. So try and mimic that in your aquarium. And I use smart plugs for everything, and my lights run for between 7 and 8 hours. And that seems more than enough to get some like really good growth and some vibrant colours, especially reds, out of the plants. And it's just one thing that you don't have to remember because you're just relying on your smart plug to do it, and you're not creating these inconsistent photo periods that could stress plants out. One more thing to mention as well, which is something that I'm currently dealing with. I did just recently change the light on this aquarium, and that has actually caused all the Crypt species in it to melt. And the ones that haven't melted are starting to. And I'm trying to combat that with dosing things like Seachem Advance, but generally Crypts are quite sensitive, and they're one of those plants that when you first put in the aquarium, they generally do just melt back, and that's entirely normal. And they basically just convert into underwater growth because with most Crypts they are grown out of water. But they are just in general a sensitive plant with quite soft leaves, so that kind of just shows that they become very, very reliant on not only a certain spectrum, but you know, a certain intensity and a certain like span photo period. And yeah, nothing in this tank has changed except the light, and now the Crypts are melting back. So things like that, little changes can have big effects on the tank, but it's not something to worry about. It's entirely normal. They're, I guess, essentially just reprogramming themselves to grow under these new conditions. As with all plants kind of do, they just adapt and overcome situations just as they would in nature. So if something like that happens, it's nothing to worry about. It's just a natural process for the plant. And then last tip is just don't neglect maintenance. So even low maintenance plants need a bit of care to stay healthy. So for Crypts, swords, lilies, removing older and damaged leaves means that the plant can then put energy into putting out new and healthy growth. Stem plants like Hygrophila or Ludwigia will also benefit from trimming because when you cut them back, they'll come back thicker and bushier. And it also means that the bottom part of the plant will still get light and it'll stop them becoming like leggy and losing the leaves. Although if that does happen, it's not a huge issue. It is just because there is sort of like a blockage of light the thicker that they get at the top. And then we've got things like Bucephalandra and Anubias, Java fern. They're slow growers, which means that their leaves sort of last a long time, and the downside of that is that algae loves to build up on them, so you might see your leaves starting to turn a little bit black, and that can actually stop light getting to the leaf and actually stopping it from photosynthesizing. So when you see that happen, you can just pull those leaves off. So they're easy fixes. You can either just trim or, you know, wipe a leaf gently during the water change, and that will keep them thriving. But yeah, just general plant maintenance and observation is certainly going to help you in keeping your plants healthy. Another thing to remember as well is that in the early days of setting a tank up, if you have used aqua soil and it is releasing ammonia, there are some plants, and I feel like this might happen more often with some species, not all, often in tissue culture, but can happen in potted as well, is that they don't like basically high levels of ammonia. And sometimes I've had it before where I've put an Anubias in a new tank and it's just completely melted, and I kind of put that down to high ammonia levels in the water. So sometimes you just need to wait a few months till it's balanced out, till you can add certain plants in. And it tends to be quite delicate plants, although Anubias isn't a delicate plant really, but evidently it doesn't like ammonia. So sometimes you just have to wait a couple of months before you can put certain plants in. And if it does melt back, just wait and try it again later on. It can just be that the tank is going through its cycle. there's going to be swings and peaks in ammonia, nitrite and nitrate, and again it's an unstable environment for a plant, and therefore they kind of just get stressed and die. So it's not always something to worry about. Obviously, if you try again and the plant still doesn't survive, then perhaps the plant's just not meant for your tank and your setup. But that's absolutely fine, because there is lots of other plants out there that you could try, and I'm sure that it would still look just as nice with a different choice. Those are the sort of top 5 reasons that I would say that your aquarium plants might be dying. And I know they seem like really simple things, and it might just be literally teaching you to suck eggs, but sometimes we do overlook the simple things, and it's not always a super complex problem. It is actually just something really easy that we have overlooked. So just to quickly run through it again, it's that you might be making the wrong plant choices for the setup that you have. The second one is that you're planting them incorrectly, whether that be quite literally planting it incorrectly or putting it in sort of like the wrong substrate and the wrong setup. 3 is a lack of nutrients and not providing your plant with what it needs to thrive. 4 is poorly managed lighting schedules, either not enough light, too little light, or inconsistent light. And the 5th is just neglecting maintenance, whether that be trimming or just your water changes. So they are extremely simple things. There's not sort of like a magic answer for this. I know that people would love that to be the case, but honestly sometimes it is just patience and observation, and just if you've got a new tank, chances are things are going to be up and down for a little while. It takes quite a few months for a tank to really settle and become mature. And then the most powerful tool that I think you have is just observation. Just watch your plants, and you'll eventually sort of like learn what a healthy plant looks like, what an unhealthy plant look like, and you'll kind of just get to grips with what it needs in order to thrive. So if you do have any questions, or you think I've missed a tip out, please leave it in the comments, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.